would like to thank you all for coming today to Connecting Students Virtually with Text. So I am lucky enough to be here today with my colleagues, Judy Bowling, who is an instructional technology consultant and also our library media consultant, as well as Kalyn Wulatin, who's our English learner consultant. So both of these ladies are amazing resources that I go to all the time for help and assistance with all things library and media and all things English learner. So please feel free to reach out to either of them or myself. I'm Michelle Wagner, and I'm one of the literacy consultants here at RESA. As we get started, we just want to remind you that we root everything we do in terms of literacy in the literacy essentials. And we do this because they are research-based practices that when implemented can have a huge impact on student learning. And we really do believe that these practices should be implemented in every classroom every day so that every child has access to high quality literacy instruction. And we believe that it's a minimum standard of care that we would like to see in every classroom across our county. One really great thing about the literacy essentials is that as we think about them, they're not a program and they don't belong just in that literacy block, but rather they go throughout the day. And when we think about our reality right now, whether you're in person or virtual or some combination, we know that focusing on those essential practices can be very beneficial. So as we think about today's learning, we really want to focus on all three of those situations because we know that learning looks different from school to school, and sometimes even within a district, the learning can vary. We want to make sure that whether students are face-to-face or they are in school, that we're leveraging those tools that allow them to connect. And even if you are in a full face-to-face model, we know that sometimes keeping students 6 feet apart necessitates the use of technology to communicate and collaborate even when we're in the same physical space. So that's one of our goals as we go through today, is just to give you some tools and tips for connecting students with those pieces of literature that can help them have conversations that just engage them and foster learning. So throughout today, we're really going to be thinking about ways to motivate all students so that they feel like successful readers and that they're able to have those books that really pique their interest so they can find those texts that they really connect with. And so whether you're a K-3 teacher or a 4-5 teacher, we really want you to think about ways you might be able to generate excitement about reading. And one of the best ways to generate excitement is to increase the quantity of books that students have access to. As always, we want to make sure that we're giving our students the choice of what they're reading whenever possible. So we never want to pigeonhole a child into a specific level or a specific kind of text because we never really know what's going to pique the interest of individual children. So we want to give them lots of choices when it comes to reading. And so we're really fortunate today to have Judy and Kalyn with us to share just ways we can connect students with different kinds of books so that every child can find something that they can relate to. So let's go ahead and pause for just a minute. And now that we've allowed everyone to join and come into the session, we want to take just a minute and find out what some of your favorite read alouds. So you'll notice on the screen, there's a short bit.ly, bit.ly/readalouds21. If you wouldn't mind navigating to that, and I believe that Kalyn is putting a link into the chat right now that you can follow if it's easier just to click. If you could just share the cover of your favorite read aloud. What text do you enjoy reading aloud the most to your students right now? Just a minute to get those ideas in there. And as you do that, I'm actually going to navigate to that site. Seeing some of my favorites pop up. Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper. Those Shoes, that's one of my very favorites. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Bibble Stacks by Devin Skillian. I was at a school once and Devin came and read that aloud to our students. We are using Padlet for this activity, and there's one thing really great about Padlet is that the resource doesn't go away. So even after today is done, you'll be able to come back to this resource and see those texts that were recommended by your colleagues from across the county, and hopefully find a few that maybe you haven't heard of before that you can access and use in your own classroom. So please feel free to keep adding to those. And hopefully as we go throughout this session, we'll have a few more great titles to add as well.
Okay, So again, to reiterate what Michelle said, just to welcome all of you and thank you for carving out time this evening to be with us. So our hope again is to help get you excited about maybe some resources or things to consider that maybe you hadn't thought of. And we thought we would start with the very basic is just our public library. I think, and especially in this digital world where we're so focused on equity and getting our kids access to digital resources, I think sometimes our public library is overlooked. And so we wanted to start here, that it's not just going physically to the library, but there are means of getting library cards into the hands of your students. The librarians that work at the public libraries are super eager to work with you and help with you. And if you have the luxury of a media specialist in your building, they can help you as well. But with that library card, your kids really have a doorway into all of the different resources that you see there. So if you're perhaps in a school that doesn't have the funding for ebooks or audiobooks or some of the databases, your local public library has those for you, and you can access those through a library card. And so again, if this is something that maybe, especially since we've been in this situation working remotely, that you've not tapped into, we would encourage you to check into your local library and see what can be done to get your kids additional access to stories, books, ebooks, audiobooks, and additional resources. Another resource that we thought we would start out with that is not digital, but is a resource that you may find helpful in connecting your kids to literature, is this Promoting STEM Through Literature. And books, we know, are a wonderful way to ignite interest and curiosity with kids. And this particular resource is all about connecting kids to STEM connections and maker-centered learning and seeing it in the world around them, even when it might not seem obvious. And so if you simply look at the titles here on this page, at a glance, they might not look like a STEM-related book. But when you read the book, read the story, have your kids read the story, all of them have constant themes around, again, maker-centered learning, innovative thinking, inventing, design thinking, prototyping, and again, looking at STEM connections in the world around them. And once you start to see that and you start having the conversations around that, you start to see that even more. And so these books here are suggested titles. They are not ebooks here. They are not audiobooks. You would have to go to an outside resource like your public library if you needed to get a digital copy of that. But what is behind each one of these books are some resources. And so I'll just click on one of them. And just at a quick glance, in here we have a design thinking journal, because this entire project, if you will, is rooted in maker-centered learning and design thinking. But each one of them has a task card that has some conversation, discussion questions, some opportunities to ignite thinking with your kids that, again, we know we can read for a different purpose, but this really is around igniting that excitement around innovative thinking and inventing. So a lot of different resources that are here, but wanted to make you aware of this. At RISA, we do have 3 copies of each of these books that can be borrowed at no cost as well. The only caveat right now is that because of COVID, we're not able to lend them, but we will let you know as soon as we can. The other piece of this is that there is a maker challenge connected to each one of these stories. Some of the maker challenges use materials that you can just find around your house or around your school. Others might require things like Dash robots or some other pieces of technology that, again, if you don't have those, we do have a maker lending library at RISA that you could borrow and utilize those to do the maker challenge with your kids. So again, just another way to get your kids excited about reading and to have some deeper conversations. One of the best resources that we have here in Michigan that we really are genuinely lucky to have is our Michigan ELibrary. So all of the resources here are digital and electronic, and they are accessible 24/7. It used to be that you had to be in a public university, a public school, or a public library to access them. Otherwise, you would have to put in a Michigan driver's license, but they now have it configured to be geo-authenticated. So basically, if you or your students are in any device within Michigan, you can access it without having to put in any usernames or passwords. And so on their homepage, just a very quick picture walk on it, you've got on the left-hand side the Melcat. So if this is where you maybe wanted to borrow a book that wasn't in your local library, you could essentially request, place a hold on it to go through the system to come to your local library. But then you also have digital e-resources, and then there's some additional sources there for library staff and some resources for you as educators. And there's a lot there that I would encourage you to check out. But we're going to take a look at some of the digital resources under the e-resources that you may or may not be familiar with your students. And you can look for them by searching or alphabetically. And there is a button there for kids. First one I want to take a look at is, so you've got your kids down here, is Britannica. Britannica is a great resource. As a former elementary teacher myself, this was the #1 resource that we use to get students, whether it be researching or reading for their own interests, using it for Genius Hour and other things like that. So what I've done across all these resources right now is using the whale as our theme so that you can see a little bit of the similarities and differences between them. But one of the nice things with the elementary version of Britannica School is that it has the information. If you look at the text there, almost they've got it chunked for you. So for some of our readers, that makes it easier for them. And so each one of the headings can collapse or expand, which again, depending on your reader, that could be helpful for them. Notice on the left, there are some multimedia elements. Depending on the topic, you may have just some images, you may have some audio, or you may have some video. And then if you're really lucky, you may have all of those. So all of those things to help enrich their understanding around the topic that they're looking for. Some other features that are really nice here is that there is a built-in dictionary. So sometimes for some of our students, when they're reading, they get to a word that they don't know how to pronounce or they don't know what it means. Most of our kids don't have any experience with the paper dictionaries that we used to have. And so one of the nice things built into Britannica is that if I simply just double click on a word, the dictionary comes to me. It has a definition and it also has an audio button here.
Animal.
And the nice thing about that is that the recording of the word is recorded by an actual human being so that you're assured that the word is being pronounced correctly, because there's nothing worse than learning how to say a word incorrectly. So that's built right into Britannica. Another feature here, just to point out here, is that it does have integration into Google Classroom, into Teams. So if that is something that you're using with your kids, that might be helpful as well. The other thing that is a nice component of Britannica is that it does have different levels. So they don't have it narrowed down to a specific reading level, but they have it categorized by elementary, middle, and high school. And so on this particular one, we can see in the upper left-hand corner that it's elementary, but sort of their code, if you will, is 1, 2, and 3. So if you see in the upper right-hand corner here, so to Britannica, 1 means elementary, 2 means middle, and 3 means high school. So if you have a reader who is looking to go a little bit deeper, if I click on number 2, kids might not notice, but you would. If you notice, it takes them actually to the middle level. And what you'll notice here is that you have a little more text. It's a little smaller font, a little less white space, but you've got some additional text here. And if I click back on number 1 to go back to that elementary version, even though it still says middle, I am taken now to that elementary text that we just saw. But what you'll notice is that it doesn't have the collapsed headings like it did visually in the elementary version. But that's a really nice feature if you were working with upper elementary kids and middle school who might be reading at a lower level and they don't want to be on a page that looks really elementary-ish. They could start out at this page and go between and toggle between those different levels. And even though you as the educator might know that 3 is geared towards high school, 2 middle, 1 elementary, the students don't know that. So if somebody's walking by in person their screen, there's nothing that would call them out as being somebody that's perhaps at a lower reading level. Another resource under MEL that is free for you as a Michigan citizen is World Book Kids. So again, using whale as our topic, it has some visuals as well. You'll notice a little more white space, a little bigger font. It has the read aloud right there. It's going to move slow for me right now because we're live, but it does speak it, whereas Britannica is a little bit more computer sounding. The World Book is more natural sounding, and it does have, like Britannica, some multimedia elements here to help enrich the understanding of the given topic and can scaffold some of that learning for your kids as well. And then there's some additional resources here at the top. Again, if you wanted to go directly to the multimedia. And then Britannica also had it, but it makes the assumption that kids might want to know more. And so rather than going out to Google and getting a bazillion of the good, the bad, and the ugly, folks behind World Book, folks behind Britannica have vetted some quality resources for your students if you're looking for that reading material as well. So a wonderful resource. Going down the grade levels, we also have the World Book Early Learning. And the early learning is geared more towards your pre-K, kindergarten levels. And so it does not have a search bar to search for things. It's more browser based. So
Samuel Stark.
And there's audio built in everywhere. So for your readers who are learning to read and need that auditory component, that's built right in there.
Samuel Stark. Samuel Stark.
And
Samuel Stark.
It really does open up to an article that it's for some reason not right now, but what you would notice, because this is geared towards the lower grades, again, bigger font, far fewer words, pictures, and again, everything built in there has that audio component, which is really nice.
Samuel Stark.
Another resource that is something that you can find in Mel is Pebble Go. Pebble Go, if you were to buy it, has a lot of different modules. For Mel, they have purchased science and animals, social studies, I'm sorry, and animals. And so I just searched for blue whales again. And so again, because this is geared more towards your kindergarten, third grade level students, that there is bigger font, smaller, bigger font, more white space. Again, the audio button built right in there has some vocabulary highlighted. Rather than having that long scrolling page of text with even those collapsible headings, it has tabs. So it again has it chunked, which makes it a little user friendly. It's very visually appealing for our younger ones. And then down here at the bottom, it has some buttons as well. So depending on the topic, you may see some variation in what those buttons are. But one of the nice ones that I think is really helpful is where it says article. And when you click on that one, what it does is it gives you a PDF of that article, which then you could download, you could print, you could assign in your Google Classroom or whatever LMS that you're using. So that's a really nice feature built right into Pebble Go. So I'm gonna hop back here to our slide deck real quick. A couple other things that are within Mel that would be applicable to the elementary level is Explora. So Explora is more of a database that taps into newspapers, magazines, and articles. And they again can search for a topic using a keyword, or they can browse and get into that. So these are a little more, not so much stories, but nonfiction. There is an ebook collection in there as well that you can access. And one of the resources that we'll be sharing with you at the end, one of the folks at Mel has actually curated books connected to just elementary science and social studies. So it's a shortcut, so you don't have to go all the way into this resource, and we will again share with you at the end. But this is what the page looks like. So you could again browse, you can search, and then, oops, the options that you have then for the text, many of them have it in PDF. And then there are some that have it as an EPUB file that you could download and actually read it within a reader. So again, another option available to you within Mel, which includes nonfiction and also stories as well. And they have thousands that are in there for you. So if you've not had a chance to look for that, we would encourage you to take the time to browse through that. Some other resources that provide choices for you and your students to take a look at various ebooks, audiobooks, and other stories. Many of you might be familiar with Storyline Online. That's been around for a really, really long time and is one of my personal all-time favorites. One of the nice things is that all of the books in there are read by different actors and actresses. And so you get a really great story read with a lot of expression and interaction. And their choices are continuing to grow every day. Epic Books is another platform that you as a teacher have free access to, where you can choose from thousands of different books that you could assign your students to read. You can track what they're reading, but lots of choices in there for students to read. And then Kalyn's going to share some additional resources in a few moments also, but we'll, again, at the end, be providing you with some links to some other online resources that give you access to ebooks for your students that are of no cost, that they can interact with and engage with. I put Library of Congress here because I think this is one of those underutilized resources, and this would be something that maybe your students aren't going to directly, but this would be something that perhaps you went to retrieve some text or some articles for your students to read. But another thing that is powerful within Library of Congress is that they have a lot of images, a lot of historical images that you could be using with your kids to have conversations and discussions. And, you know, what do they notice? And that could be something that sets the foundation perhaps for different texts that you might be engaging with your students with as well, to kind of hook them into maybe that time period that it is that you might be studying. And for this one, I'm going to jump out. So PBS Media Learning, we know PBS, we know that's a reliable resource. This is a great resource for multimedia elements, again, to support perhaps topics that you're studying, books that your children are reading and interacting with, just to build up some of that schema for them. And so with any topic that you search for, if you look along the left, there are a lot of filters that you can go through to narrow down your search. And you can also identify what type of resource you're looking for. So again, it will depend on the topic that you choose. But if you know that you are looking for a video, you can just choose that. You can identify the grade level, and there are some connections that you can look by standard as well. If you didn't notice that, if you do look on the thumbnails, you can see also that you've got some documents, videos, and images that are there as well. So a powerful resource. If you have not explored this, it is free for you to use. And again, we know that the information that is being put out by PBS is really high quality information to use. So a great resource. Wonderopolis is a site that my students went to a lot, because whether it be Genius Hour, just interest, nonfiction text, but Wonderopolis is a wonderful website where they put out different questions every single day with the whole intent of sparking curiosity, getting kids to think creatively, using their imagination. There's also a place where they could submit questions. So a great supportive resource for text that your kids could be reading. One of the features on Wonderopolis that I want to point out is this icon right here. It looks like a little book with an audio icon on there as well. And that is the icon for Immersive Reader. And I'm going to show you in a moment what that does, but I wanted to mention that it is included on this Wonderopolis website. So as your students are interacting with different text online, some of them might be just an ebook. Some of them might be a database. Some of that interaction might be like the Promoting STEM Through Literature, where it's a physical book that you're retrieving and you're engaging your students in an experience that taps into, again, that maker-centered learning, the innovative thinking, the maker challenge. If you're using websites with your students where they're retrieving articles for information, there are some tools out there that can help that experience with your students be more helpful. And so Teen Tribune is a wonderful resource to use with your students. If you're not familiar with it, it is a part of the Smithsonian resources that they have available. And if you look across the top, you can see that there are different grade levels that you can explore. Within this article itself, you can see that it also identifies Lexile levels. And again, you can assign it to your Google Classroom. So a couple of resources that we're going to take a look at. One, going back to that Immersive Reader icon that we shared. Immersive Reader is a powerful tool to help with accessibility with your students. And so there's a lot of information on this page. For some of your readers, it might be very distracting. It might be that font is too small. It might be that there's a lot of text and we need to chunk it up. So in Wonderopolis, I pointed out that Immersive Reader icon built in, but there are not many sites that have that built in. So what I've done is I've actually installed the Immersive Reader extension into Chrome. And what I can do is highlight. So for example, if I wanted to highlight this text, if this were the text that I was as a student interested in reading, and I have that Immersive Reader extension installed, what I can do is right click on that text, and I have this choice now that says, help me read this. So I'm going to choose that. And if all goes well, it comes up in Immersive Reader. So immediately it looks different. You can see big font, lots of white space. At the bottom here, you see a play button.
Tease the biggest shark.
It can read to you. You've got some settings here where you can adjust the speed if you would prefer a male voice to a female voice. In the upper right-hand corner, it's a little covered up with my Zoom sharing right now, so I'm going to do my best to do it invisibly. So the one on the left that is not visible right now because of my screen sharing, but there's 3 buttons at the top, and the one on the left that I can't click on at the moment gives you access to the coloring. Do you want white with black text, black with white text? It gives you the option to, right now we see the whole paragraph. So for some of our students, maybe they need it to be just 1 line, maybe just 2 lines. And so you can make that choice. The middle of those buttons that you can't see right now are the syllables. So if that's something that's of value or important, you can turn that on, you can turn that off. If you need to see parts of speech, I turned on nouns. You see that all the nouns are now purple. Again, it depends on your purpose. And then the 3rd button on the right that allows me to click on that. I have a translation component there. The picture dictionary is on by default. So if I click on any word, if it has a picture representation, it will show, and I have that audio feature there as well. So Immersive Reader is a really helpful accessibility tool if that is something that some of your students need to interact with text, particularly on web pages. And so again, in Wonderopolis, it's built right in there. And there are other tools. If you're somebody who uses Microsoft Teams, Immersive Reader is a Microsoft product, so it's automatically built into all of the Microsoft tools that are out there. So wanted to point that out if that was something that you're not familiar with. Another tool that might be helpful as you are using different text with your students is called Mercury Reader. And Mercury Reader is an extension that helps to clear away the clutter on a page. So again, for some of your students, to read through something like this one doesn't actually have that much on it. Let me go back to Tween Tribune and we'll just click on this one again. So something like this where you see the header at the top, you see images, you see some advertisements. For some of your kiddos, that's fine. Like they can focus on the text itself, but for other students, that's really disruptive and it's very distracting and they struggle to stay focused on the text itself. So there are a couple of extensions that can be helpful in helping your students be more focused on the text itself. And one of them is called Mercury Reader. So that extension up here on the top looks like a little rocket ship. That's a button that I can toggle on and off. When I toggle it on, you see immediately it cleaned it up all of those distractions. And so now as a reader, I can read through that text with a lot of white space, without all the distractions. And if I simply click on that button again, it takes me right back to the page. So it's just a toggle on, toggle off, but it can be a very helpful tool in clearing away, again, some of that distraction clutter for your students. Another tool that's similar is called Print Friendly. And Print Friendly does clear away a lot of the clutter, but it automatically gives you the ability to then print that out as a PDF that you could then print or assign in Google Classroom or whatever other LMS that you are using. So that icon looks like a little printer up there. So I'll click on that one. And similarly, you see a lot of that clutter has been taken away. And I can scroll through there. But what you might also be noticing is as I hover over different chunks, you notice that that trash can appears. So this gives me some flexibility and some autonomy to pick and choose what I want perhaps my students to be reading. Sometimes advertisements still come up in here. So I would scroll through there and delete things that might not be relevant. So for example, at the bottom of this, I see comments where if this was an article I wanted to share with students, perhaps assign to them, I don't need all these comments at the end. That's irrelevant to what it is that I need students to be reading. So I could easily come in here, just hit that delete button, and I'm deleting all those comments, basically just cleaning up the document so that what I give my students is simply the content that I want them to be reading. So it's cleaned up now. At this point, I can save it as a PDF, I can print it and help my students with that text. And then the last tool that may be helpful with your students in interacting with the text online is an extension called Read Aloud. This extension looks like a little megaphone there, and I'm going to go to a different article here. And by simply clicking on the megaphone.
American alligator. American alligators once faced extinction.
So it's really simple. Again, toggle it on, toggle it off. You've got very few choices here. One of them is the gear. And I've got some choices to, again, speed it up, adjust the volume and whatnot. But sometimes,
alligator.
Sometimes having these tools for the students, again, it helps with the accessibility of it. It helps them to interact with the text themselves. These tools work on web pages. So if you were to download an ebook, depending on what the reader is for that, these tools most likely wouldn't work, but oftentimes in some of the readers, they have a lot of these tools that are built into the platform that you're using yourself. And so with that, that is a lot of resources around different articles, different online resources, some that are print, some that are digital, that you can use with your students to have them interacting with text virtually. And at this point, I am going to pass it to Kalyn.
Thank you, Judy, for sharing all those amazing resources and tools. Michelle and I have been busy in the chat shouting them out and how they can be used with different learners. So I just want to take some time at the end here to do a little bit about multilingual learners in all of this. As you can see on this slide, having an asset-based and language-focused perspective is really important. And my biggest shout out that I want to give here is for use of the home language or the native language or the primary language in reading. Reading in the native language, and I have the research studies in the presentation if you need to go cite that to some administrators, but it supports reading in English at all levels of English proficiency. Now, this isn't really surprising if you think about reading as making meaning and you think about everything about reading being under the umbrella of comprehension, right? So if you're making meaning and you understand what reading is in your native or primary language, you may need to acquire more English vocabulary. You may need to acquire English phonics and some other things to make you to be as successful at reading in English, but you understand what reading is. So really we want to encourage the use of the home language in reading and the ways they can support both at school and at home. So I guess what else I'm trying to say is, even though, of course, when you have your guided reading group or whatever you're doing, you would be focusing on the English language, there are other things they can be doing, like if students are researching or whatever, that it is certainly available to them depending on their level, but to be reading things in their home language. Up there, WIDA. Michigan is a WIDA state. That stands for World Class Instruction, Design, and Assessment. And all children bring to their learning cultural and linguistic practices, skills, and ways of knowing from their homes and communities. So one of the ways of honoring that is allowing things to happen in the native language. And finally, on that point, we always ask children, like when they're retelling or they're making inferences or anything like that, yeah, please tell me in your own words. Well, there's nothing like using your own words when you're paraphrasing from one language to another. So if that is within someone's skill set, whether they're reading something in their native language and paraphrasing it to use the teacher or a classmate in English, or reading something in English and talking to their family about it at home in their native language, they're certainly using their own words. Thank you. Can you go on, Judy? So I just, and all of these are on the Padlet that we're about to share with you. First, I will actually put in a plug for the Multilingual Family Padlet. We will be giving you a Padlet specifically for this and connecting students with text and virtual text. But this is one that is on both of the Padlets, and this is Unite for Literacy. And what happens here is there are books written primarily in English, some in Spanish, but all of these books can be read in another language. So if you see here, up the icon a little bit in the upper left, that kind of looks like a chopped up world there, that's where you can change the language for the audio that they're going to hear when they hear the book. So again, even if the book is written in English, they're going to be hearing it in Arabic or Vietnamese or what have you. If you can see there in the one that's right under that, where there's a little pencil, that's what the book is written in. And as I said, of course, they're all in English, and then some of them are also written in Spanish as well. Next, Judy, thanks. Here is another wonderful site, Global Storybooks. They have stories from all over the world. And again, there's a couple pages from one of the ones at level 1. Estará debajo de la cama. He's looking for his cat and going all over, and you can see that book in multiple languages. There are also some tales that happen to be originally written in other languages of other countries, and you basically go and click on a country and a language and go on. And again, there is audio opportunities as well as reading ones. Judy, thank you. So different kinds of supports. Now, a lot of these Judy brought up in all of the wonderful resources that she shared. So all those kinds of visuals that she was showing, where there were video, where there were photos, where there were maps, all of these things, of course, support reading for multilingual learners as well as other children. Having text at multiple levels, like on Tween Tribune or some of the other ones, Britannica, and those can be very, very helpful. Layering multimodal text, and what I mean, I stole that from Dr. Goldie Muhammad, who's another wonderful person to read and follow. But talking about having perhaps a main text or a principal text or a topic or a theme, and building around that a series of multimodal text, which helps students have access to the main text. So the multimodal text, again, can be photos, can be videos, can be podcasts, can be songs, can be maps, can be other kinds of diagrams and tables, and all the good stuff that we know would really support someone in their reading comprehension. And again, it's very important for students to see themselves in text. So Dr. Rudine Sims-Bishop and Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Doors, right? So we've included, there's a lot of different books on the social justice books. That particular link is to their guide for selecting anti-bias children's books. And they go over very well if something is not recommended and why, if it is highly recommended and why, or recommended with reservations. So that's a great place to check out as well. Okay, Judy. And finally, here on some of these other things that Judy was showing us, like Storyline Online, and there's another one that Indianapolis Public Library still has up from the beginning of the pandemic, this 100+ free video read-alouds. Both of these can come up on YouTube, or at least like for Storyline Online, there's a YouTube option. And that can be good for captions, closed captioning in English or in other languages. So there's a little directions there on what to click on. This is also in the Padlet, and I have a little video showing how to do that. Now, for the children themselves, especially younger children, it's going to go too fast. If they're even reading in their native language, it will probably be going too fast for them. But that could be a good option for parents and caregivers and family members who may be reading with the child. So maybe it's a book they're familiar with and they've enjoyed it. And then, the parent can be reading the captioning in their language. This captioning is not perfect. It's based on the languages that Google Translate supports, but it has gotten much, much better in the last few years. So I will give a shout out to that. World Book was another one that I was dropping in the chat, and they actually have a very natural sounding voice, even when they're reading in other languages. And again, World Book is listed a couple of times on the Padlet we are about to share with you for our activity, once as itself and once in the multilingual text column where I explain exactly how you access those languages. So all the instructions would be right there. Okay, next, Judy. Thank you. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to give you access to the Padlet that I just promised, our big one for the today, and that is connecting students with virtual text. And we're going to give you some time to explore this. And I think we are going to do breakouts, correct? Maybe 2 or 3? Okay.
Yes.
So, yeah, and this time there's not going to be any like Jamboard or any associated work. We're just going to leave it open for exploration and discussion. So if you want to click on that link, you could also do the bit.ly that you see on the slide, or I dropped the link in the chat if you'd rather just click. And the conversation, these are just guiding questions, whatever kind of comes up for you in your group. If you find a resource on there that you might like to use with your students and talk about that, or maybe want to share things that you're already doing to connect your students with text and anything else. This is kind of a let your conversation go, and we'll have about 11 minutes in the breakout rooms for this.